Central Africa. A quarter of a million people are now homeless in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There are desperate scenes as people struggle to get what little aid is available, and reports the rebels have driven 50,000 people out of a refugee camp. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis are at full pitch. The presidents of Rwanda and Congo have both agreed to attend the summit, and France and Britain have sent their foreign ministers to the region. Orla Guerin is in the Congolese town of Goma. You may find some of her reports distressing. Alan Little there. Well, later in the programme we'll hear from Tim Irwin from the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. The US State Department says Libya has paid $1.5 billion into a compensation fund for victims of terrorism. The two countries agreed to create the fund in a deal signed earlier this year. The BBC's Washington correspondent Kim Gattas reports. Two Israeli television channels have cancelled plans to broadcast an interview with the man who assassinated the former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Yigal Amir, an extremist Jew, has never expressed remorse for the killing in 1995. The two channels have already aired excerpts from the interview in which Amir tried to justify his actions. Israeli politicians have condemned the television channels for airing the remarks. At least 6 Belgian tourists have been killed and dozens injured in a bus crash in southern Egypt. The driver, who was apparently speeding, lost control and veered off the road, causing the bus to overturn several times. The injured were flown to Cairo, where they're recovering in hospital. 6 are reportedly in a serious condition. Police in Colombia have arrested 27 members of major drugs rings after several raids across the country. The raids were carried out in a joint operation with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. Some of the alleged dealers are also accused of carrying out paramilitary operations. In America, the presidential candidates John McCain and Barack Obama are into the final sprint for the White House. With just 3 days to go before Tuesday's election, Obama is ahead in all the national polls and some key states. But John McCain has been telling voters that he can still win. Our North America editor, Justin Webb, reports.
So a lot of conflicting advice, and many pregnant women may decide in the end that it's safest just to steer clear of drink altogether.
This is World News Today from the BBC. The main news: with the humanitarian crisis in eastern Congo worsening, Congolese and Rwandan leaders have agreed to attend a peace summit. Libya contributes $1.5 billion for victims of terrorism. Families of the Lockerbie victims will benefit. Back now to our top story and the escalating conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Tens of thousands of people have fled their homes, and there are reports that refugee camps have been attacked and burned. Tim Irwin from the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, told me that thousands are helpless and in desperate need. Tim Irwin there. The American General David Petraeus has taken over U.S. military operations throughout the Middle East and much of Asia, including Afghanistan. He was the architect of the surge strategy in Iraq and is widely credited with the dramatic improvement in security there. Japan's defense minister has announced the dismissal of the country's Air Force chief after he argued that Japan was not an aggressor in World War II. General Toshio Tamagami claimed Japan was lured into the war by the US. 2 Austrian hostages kidnapped by Al-Qaeda in the Tunisian Sahara in February have been freed. Al-Qaeda's North African wing was demanding the release of jailed militants, and it's reported a $6 million ransom. A senior member of Britain's Special Forces, the SAS, has resigned in protest at what he's called chronic underinvestment in the kit provided to those fighting in Afghanistan. It's reported that in his resignation letter, he claimed the lack of equipment was cavalier at best and criminal at worst. He accused the Ministry of Defence of gross negligence in ignoring his repeated warnings that the Snatch armoured Land Rover didn't offer enough protection. Our defence correspondent Caroline Wyatt reports. It took 46 days and nights to complete the jeans, which weigh almost 2 tons. The garment is currently being showcased at an exhibition in the Peruvian capital, Lima. Don't fancy having to wash those. Our main news again, with the humanitarian crisis in eastern Congo worsening, Congolese and Rwandan leaders have agreed to a peace summit. In the next half hour on World News Today, tens of thousands of Pakistanis still without shelter after their homes were destroyed by Wednesday's earthquake. The powerful poetry inspired by the war to end all wars, is it still pertinent today? You're watching World News Today, the latest headlines now on the BBC. The Rwandan and Congolese presidents have agreed to attend a summit to try to resolve the conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The agreement came after the European Union
The patient was found collapsed on the street. His beats were low, his pupils were stationary, and I could see 2 puncture wounds on his elbow. Looks like a case of drug overdose to me.